Hello, and welcome to carbonwhy, the channel that's catered to those who are avid lifelong learners. My channel explores the how, what, where, why the world works the way it does. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you can get notified of my next video. In this week's episode, we find out why tiny microchips are crippling the global auto industry and driving up prices. As if the lockdown wasn't already hard enough on the automotive industry in 2020, the industry now faces another huge problem: a shortage of chips. These chips are essential for countless functions in cars, trucks, and SUVs. Companies from all sorts of industries are vying for the dwindling supply of microchips, and the small pool of manufacturers is disproportionate to the sheer need for the chips. Early on in the lockdown, automakers had to cut their production, and now they're facing a shortage of chips. Chip manufacturers have diverted their supply chains more towards industries that weren't hit as hard by the work from home orders that kept car buyers away from dealerships. Now automakers are finding that they've been pushed all the way to the back of the line. Analysts say that the shortage of chips could cost the auto industry around 60 billion, and some of the biggest names in the auto industry are cutting production of even their most popular vehicles. For the modern car, the shortage of chips is especially bad. Cars today are far more technologically advanced than their predecessors. Today's vehicles need chips for pretty much everything, like engine control units, transmission control, brakes, steering, infotainment systems. Chips are even needed for safety tech such as sensors and backup cameras. Even things like the temperature sensor and heat lamps require chips. But more and more customers want cars with high-tech features, and that requires complex hardware and software and chips. There's a staggering number of chips in even the most simple vehicles. These chips are used in everything. There can be thousands of chips in a vehicle, and the more high-tech a car is, the more chips it requires during production. The lockdown saw a dramatic drop in sales. The first 2 months of 2020 saw a modest decline of 12.7% compared to Q1 of 2019. But by the time March came and the stay-at-home measures began taking effect in the US, new vehicle sales fell 38.4% compared to March 2019. But soon after that, sales began to slowly rise, and by May, sales were down just 30% compared to May 2019. And in June, they were down by only 26.7% compared to June 2019. The slow rise in auto sales just highlights how important the chip shortages are. Automakers are brainstorming on how they can rectify the shortages issue, or what engineering decisions they need to make to still be able to build as many of their most profitable vehicles as possible. Each industry uses different types of chips for their specific needs. For cars, the chips need to be durable and long-lasting. What this means is that automotive industry chips tend to be older designs called legacy chips, and that's a problem for automakers. Legacy chips aren't very profitable to chip manufacturers, and they were already running into their own shortages because of production constraints. So they began prioritizing available chips for the more profitable industries that were less likely to have to cut back supplies in the event of a lockdown, resulting in chip shortages for the automobile industry. While the auto industry was left to flounder for chips, the demand for consumer electronics like gaming consoles, TVs, phones, and webcams sharply increased because of lockdowns and stay-at-home orders. And the semiconductor industry prioritized this industry to supply chips to instead, because they saw it as more profitable. So the real problem is that there was already a shortage in chips in the first place, and automakers were slowing down their production because of the lockdown, while other industries increased theirs. And when the automotive industry started to catch back up, the semiconductor industry just didn't have the capacity to make the pace and fulfill the demand. And now it's not just the production of new cars that's affected by the chip shortages, but the workers themselves too. Automakers were even forced to furlough some of their workers. Estimates show that the shortages could cost the whole auto industry 60.6 billion this year. General Motors expects the chip shortage will cut their profits by 1.5 to 2 billion in 2021. Ford Motor Company is expecting losses somewhere around 1 and 2.5 billion. Honda has called for temporary production halts at 3 Japanese plants in May. And Nissan also called for stoppages in Japan and at 3 factories in North America. It's hard to find any car manufacturers that haven't had to slow down or suspend production because of the shortage. But if the automaker plant is down, that also means that all of the suppliers for parts are also down, all around the world. Automakers like Ford, General Motors and Stellantis have had to cut back on the production of even their best-selling and most profitable models, like their full-size pickup trucks. Still, the demand for vehicles was relatively strong during the lockdown, so much so that a lot of the vehicles sold were used. Newer, pricier vehicles were also sold, but evidence shows that consumers bought them simply because that was what was available. And because suppliers were tight due to the shortages and all throughout the industry and the supply chain, automakers pushed whatever materials they did have to their fastest selling and most popular cars and trucks. Automakers were not only surprised when sales started to increase again, but they were caught off guard because they couldn't source the chips they needed to begin manufacturing more cars to meet with the demand. The upside was that the chip shortage shined a light on a problem the industry had seen hints of before. The chip supply chain was already uncertain, and there were only a few places that made them. Supply chains can be pretty obscure, and automakers are on one side of it while chip makers are on the other. So fluctuations in demand at one end can set off pretty big overcorrections on the other end. And because the automakers couldn't meet the demands and had to cut their orders, and it rippled out through all of the tiers of the supply chain. Another problem is that chips are created for such specific uses that they aren't interchangeable among different products. They are custom built at their earlier stages of production for the very specific needs that different industries have for them. So automakers can't just pivot to another supply or alternative. The financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 created a similar effect for the automotive supply chain, where chips experienced a shortage, which then slowed car and automotive production. Because of this, more of the conventional automotive companies have invested in semiconductor manufacturing for the safety of having their own supply of chips, and they have their own fabs which they have vertically integrated with their auto production. While it doesn't cover their entire demand, but those companies are a bit better off today in relation to the shortages that are ravaging the industry. Options are limited for now, though. Automakers can either work with the current supplies or try to source materials elsewhere. Because building new chip manufacturing fabs will take months, if not years. The good thing is that the industry is recognizing that they can't solely rely on the few semiconductor producers in the world. Automotive supplier Bosch said that they'll open a chip factory in Dresden, Germany by June. The plant was already in construction before the shortage hit, but the chips that will be made there are not the same as the ones that are currently in short supply. But industry analysts say it's still a step in the right direction and a sign that the automotive industry is trying to reduce its dependence on the chip makers of the world. Vehicles are already loaded with electronics and cool features and comfort settings, but the next generation of cars are more than likely to be even more tech-heavy, which suggests that chips will become even more important in production. Let's just hope that the automotive industry has come up with solutions to meet the demands they will no doubt face. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please link and subscribe and watch these videos that might pique your interest. Thank you for your support.